You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the beginning of the latest season of Doctor Who, featuring the 15th Doctor, with the first two episodes that dropped at the same time, Space Babies and Devil's Chord. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Father Corey couldn't be with us today, but he'll be back soon. But for now, I want to remind everyone to like The Secrets of Doctor Who on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Secrets of Doctor Who. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and leave us comments. Join the conversation wherever you find us. We really love to hear from you. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy, called The Secrets of Middle-earth, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/Middle-earth. So, as I mentioned, we're talking the season premiere of the latest season of Doctor Who, featuring the new Doctor, the 15th Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa. And the first episode is called Space Babies. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in Space Babies?
Yeah, first, though, I should mention that we're going to be covering the first two episodes of the new season in this podcast, because they released two episodes at once, and so we're going to be reviewing them. First, we'll do Space Babies, then we'll do the Devil's Chord. So in this episode, the 15th Doctor takes Ruby on a whirlwind tour through space and time. After a quick comedic stop in the late Jurassic, he takes her to not the 22nd century, but it's like the 220th century, where they end up on a space station filled with babies who are 6 years old and have the minds of 6 years old, but are still physically babies. There is a scary bogeyman in the lower decks, and the station is also run by an Alexa app named Nanny. But it turns out that Nanny is really a woman named Jocelyn who is hiding from the babies. She reveals that the station was shut down and the crew ordered to return home, but against orders, Jocelyn stayed behind to take care of the babies. But time is running out because there is a limited oxygen and food supply on the station, so Jocelyn and the babies are doomed. However, there is a planet nearby that takes refugees, but you have to get there under your own power, and the space station doesn't have engines. The Doctor proposes using the TARDIS, but first they have to deal with the scary bogeyman. Ultimately, Ruby figures out that the teaching software on the ship created the bogeyman. It went haywire, believing that children need stories, and so it created a living story with the babies, their nanny, and a bogeyman. The Doctor then discovers that the bogeyman is literally made out of bogies, or boogers, as we'd say in America. Jocelyn tries to space the bogeyman, but the Doctor manages to save it. Afterward, he reveals that the station has been saving the babies' nappies, or diapers, for the last 6 years, and he releases the built-up methane to propel them to the refugee planet. So yes, they go there on a giant space fart. Afterwards, they return to spend Christmas with Ruby's family, but there are ominous signs pointing towards our season arc. At one point in the episode, the Doctor's memory changes of when he first saw Ruby's mother at the church where she was found. In the new memory, the woman points at the Doctor. And then it starts snowing on the space station where Doctor and Ruby are now. The Doctor interprets this as a warning, and he says he can never take Ruby back to that church lest it create a horrible paradox. Without Ruby knowing, though, he does scan her genetic code in the TARDIS, and then when the Doctor gets out, it starts snowing in the TARDIS. The end.
All right. So, overall impression of this first episode?
Well, it was silly, but it was fun. It also resonated with the beginning of the first Russell T Davies era in some big ways. The 15th Doctor is massively in contrast to the 9th Doctor. The 9th Doctor had just come from the Time War. His people were gone and so forth. And he was a walking emotional wreck. You know, he had all this anger and guilt and stuff like that. And here, when the Doctor is explaining who he is and his background to Ruby, you know, he admits he's the last one of his kind. He says there was a genocide and they died. But then he says, and I'm so glad to be alive. And he's just full of life and happiness. and desire for adventure and he does not have that guilty, tragic overhang that the Ninth Doctor and all the New Era Doctors up to now have had. He then takes so that's him as a point of contrast. The first real adventure, the first off-world adventure for Rose was to go to the end of the world, where we watched the sun expand and destroy the earth. And in that, we got a really grand vista, a space vista that Rose got to look at. And the Doctor upgraded her phone to a super phone so she could call her mom back in the 21st century. And here, we instead of going to the end of the world, we go to a station filled with babies, with new life, with, hope and cuteness and things like that. And we get Ruby staring at a great space vista, and the Doctor takes her cell phone and sonics it to upgrade it to a super phone, and she calls her mom back in the 21st century. So Russell T Davies is deliberately echoing things from the beginning of his first run in a new key, where instead of tragic and the world is ending, it's optimistic and babies are being born.
Right. Yeah, I agree on the energy in this one as well. This very much feels like the 15th Doctor, and I think we've said this before when we talked about the Christmas special, the manicness of the 10th and 11th. This is classic Russell T Davies manic Doctor. The high energy, running about, not even just when he's running from things, but just running about because he's so full of energy. So it's got a lot of that feel to it, and that can be fun. I was a little taken aback by a baby farm. I mean, that's clearly not a moral thing to do, is to grow babies in test tubes.
Note for future generations: do not grow babies in test tubes. Right.
I mean, it felt like we're there was a bit of an inhumanity how whatever this organization, or I think it was a corporation or organization or something in the future, treating babies like people, human beings, like products, and when the market turns down, we just abandon them, in a landfill.
Well, so there are sort of two separate issues here. One of them is they're growing babies artificially in artificial wombs, which are basically big tubes. And they look creepy. And the Doctor says this is done to keep the population up. And okay, yeah, from an amoral perspective, that makes sense. You need to keep your planetary population up, but it's not moral to do it this way. Children need mothers and fathers. Then there's the issue of what the corporation does. And I think this is a flaw in but it's on the dialogue level. I don't have a problem with an amoral corporation in the future abandoning a bunch of babies. That's an amoral thing to do, but corporations can behave amorally. So I don't have a problem with that. But what they do once they meet Jocelyn is she's explaining the situation, and she plays some videos of the crew lodging protests as they were abandoning the station under orders. And their uniforms look like Star Trek uniforms. But as they're abandoning the station, they're lodging protests. And so that's good. That shows human consciousness. It's not a completely bleak future. But Jocelyn says the law requires that you cannot turn off the baby making machine. And Ruby comments about how it doesn't make any sense to say you can't stop making babies, but then you're going to not take care of them. And she says that's like a crazy planet. And then she says, well, maybe not so crazy. And what that is a pro-abortion reference on Russell T Davies' part, based on the myth that pro-lifers want babies to be born, but then aren't willing to take care of them, which is absolutely false. Our society generally has all kinds of aid for newborns, including newborns, who are born to single mothers and things like that. And pro-lifers are among the most generous people and adopt way beyond the societal average and donate way beyond the societal average to unwed mother centers and newborn care facilities and things like that. So this is a pro-abortion myth, and it's a flaw in this episode, but it's only on the dialogue level. It could be fixed with just rewriting a couple of lines of dialogue. But it's Russell T Davies being a spiteful jerk.
Yeah. I mean,
in an otherwise fun episode.
Yeah. Inserting his ideology into what was otherwise a fun episode. It does start from where we left off with the Christmas episode, the Church on Ruby Road, with Ruby entering the TARDIS for the first time. And we have this extended sequence of the Doctor basically explaining everything you need to know about Doctor Who if you haven't watched a single episode of Doctor Who yet, in order to enjoy the episode. I mean, it's really, as we've talked before, this is the BBC and Disney trying to get a whole new audience and getting them up to speed real quick with Doctor Who.
I thought they did pretty good with that. Instead of one big long exposition dump, they kind of spaced it out a little bit, and you can see the Doctor introducing Ruby to new concepts from Doctor Who lore across the first 2 episodes. So they didn't just hit us with everything. Here's everything you need to know about me all at once. They've been parceling it out, and he still hasn't explained regeneration to her. No,
and he does mention, without specifically saying the words, the timeless child paradox, that he's adopted and all that sort of stuff.
He mentions it repeatedly. There's a lot about the timeless child. I mean, they don't really advance the plot, but they acknowledge that now as part of Doctor Who lore repeatedly. And reportedly, according to Russell T Davies, that's somehow going to play into the spine of this season. The fact that both he and Ruby are adopted is gonna be central to this season. So I say good. One of the flaws with Chris Chibnall's era was he didn't do anything after he introduced the concept. He had the Doctor get her memories of her former lives in a fob watch, and she dropped it down a chute in the TARDIS and said, I guess I'll deal with this in the future. And he didn't develop it any. So, even though Davies may not want to tie too much into the previous eras of the show, I think it's good that he's wanting to not only acknowledge and embrace the timeless child, but also, make it central to the plot somehow. I doubt he'll go too far down that road, but it's nice he's doing something with it.
Yeah. And it's clear that the mystery of Ruby Sunday is going to play a part. Yeah. I mean, based on the first 2 episodes, a huge part in all of this season. It's not even just a small, bad wolf being written on a wall from the first Russell T Davies, the 9th Doctor season. This is upfront and a part of the plot. And in this one, he mentions how, it's weird, a weird coincidence that babies keep popping up around you, from the
Christmas child,
Church on Ruby Road. Yeah. And this one.
Yeah, and adoption and babies, and he explicitly says that it's all tying into you, and so somehow Ruby is driving where they're going without even intending to. It's her mystery that is determined, and that's why they came here. She didn't know that they were going here, but the reason they're at a baby farm is because of her adoption baby thing that's going on with her.
Right.
And there's a countervailing force, because we have the totally bizarre thing where the Doctor's having a memory of when he saw her being left at the church, and he gets this memory change of the woman who left her pointing at him. Not sure why, not sure what the meaning of that gesture is, but he says that's a change in the memory. And then as the 2 of them are standing there, it starts snowing on a space station. And then it starts as which he says is a warning. And then it starts snowing again as a warning after the doctor has done a scan of her in the TARDIS, although neither he nor she is there to see the snow the second time.
In the scan, like from what I could see on screen, nothing unusual was in the scan data, whatever. Well, like it wasn't like something flashing or whatever, as far as I could see.
Yeah, I've seen this moment pointed or compared to like when the 11th Doctor scanned Amy Pond and it couldn't resolve is she pregnant or not. This identifies Ruby as, I mean, it says it's a DNA scan and it identifies Ruby as human, but then it's got a percentage on it that is less than 100%. It's it was like 68%, but it didn't identify what that percentage was. So, so she may not be entirely normal.
I mean, I wonder if it's connected to the toy maker and the maestro, which we'll be talking about soon, and whatever they are. I wonder if it's connected, or if it's something completely different, which it could possibly be.
Well, yeah, there's some theories, and I'll just mention one of them right now. That if they do this, I hope they pay it off differently than they've set it up. But there is an actress named, and I'm going to cross over and talk a little bit about the Devil's Chord for a moment. There is an actress named Susan Twist who originally appeared in Wild Blue Yonder, where she played Mrs. Merridew, the lady who was there with Isaac Newton right before he discovered Mavity. And she then appears in the church at Ruby Road, hundreds of years later, as a nameless woman who's at Ruby's Christmas concert, and she asks if they can play Gaudete, which is a Steel Eye Span version of a classic Christmas hymn in Latin. Gaudete is Latin; it means rejoice. And then she appears in Space Babies as one of the 220th century crew members who's resigning. She's in the video. She's wearing a blue Star Trek-like uniform. And I believe she wasn't an accountant. What did she say she was? But she was one of the station officers, and she was lodging her protest video as she's signing off. And then in The Devil's Chord, she's a tea lady, where the Doctor and Ruby are in this kind of cafeteria, and the Doctor never sees her face because he's turned around when he's facing the table with all the teacups. She's turned around, and then when he turns around, she turns to look, and we get to see who it is, and it's Susan Twist again. And she's this tea lady, and she tells the Doctor it's going to be half a crown for 2 cups of tea, which is an astonishing amount of money. Apparently, I worked it out, and let me scroll down to my Devil's Chord notes. I worked it out, and it's basically the equivalent of $2.20 for 2 cups of tea, which the Doctor says is highway robbery. And Susan Twist, who it doesn't have a name, she's just a tea lady, but she says, "That's me, Margaret Lockwood, in The Wicked Lady," which is a 1945 film about a highway woman. So anyway, we have Susan Twist being setting up for being some kind of major character reveal later. Now, here comes, I guess, a couple more pieces of data. The Doctor, at the end of The Devil's Chord, and Ruby do this kind of UK Bollywood number called "There's Always a Twist at the End." And that the end is where they're likely to do a reveal with Susan Twist. So and notice she's in multiple centuries. She's in the 17th century with Isaac Newton. She's in the 20th century where she's the tea lady and where she's the Steel Eye Span fan. And she's in the 220th century where she's an officer on the space station. So she is across multiple centuries. And the actress's last name is Twist. What about the actress's first name? Well, on Twitter a while back, people were talking about Carol Ann Ford and Susan, the doctor's granddaughter. And in The Devil's Chord, as the doctor and Ruby are on the roof of the EMI building in 1963, he points towards Shoreditch or wherever it is and says, "I'm over there right now on Totter's Lane, and my granddaughter Susan is with me." And Ruby asks, "What happened to Susan?" And the doctor says, "Well, I don't know. There was this genocide rippling out through all of space and time, and I don't know what happened to her." So if there's always a twist at the end, maybe Susan Twist, the immortal who is in multiple centuries, or either is an immortal or a time traveler, has a connection to Susan. And okay, fine, I'd be up for that, but I want Carol Ann Ford. I don't want. I mean, if bring me Carol Ann Ford, and if she regenerates into Susan Twist, that's okay. But I want Carol Ann Ford, Susan. Because Carol Ann Ford is still around, and if they bring Susan back as they should, it should be with Carol Ann Ford.
It's interesting. IMDb lists for Susan Twist. The only Doctor Who credit she has is this one. The Devil's Chord, the tea lady. Nothing else, which is kind of fascinating. I mean, I don't know if that's just an error from IMDb or not.
Yeah, it's all fan submitted data.
I don't know if it is these days. IMDb, I think, is
it may not be these days.
Interesting. Her character in this one, in Space Babies, is named Gina Scalzi. I don't know if that's an homage to John Scalzi or not, but
could be.
Yeah. So, a couple other notes. The Doctor, in describing himself to Ruby, says, he talks about what he does or who he is. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have a cause. He doesn't have a mission, but he has freedom. And and that's an interesting way of describing who the Doctor is. While he ends up, often helping people, he's not on a mission to help people. He's always been about just exploring and encountering and taking each day as it comes and seeing what there is out there and bringing someone with him and experiencing, rather than seeking out. It's not like Star Trek. He's not seeking out new life and new civilizations. He's just experiencing what the universe has to offer and taking everything as it comes and dealing with it. And, it's not like he turns away from people in need. It's the exact opposite. But I thought it was just an interesting way of describing what he does to a companion. I don't think I've heard him talk about himself that way before.
One thing that I thought was interesting, so an obvious question, especially if you're a new fan, is what is the Doctor's name? And so Ruby asks him that question. And he says, well, the people that raised me, and he tells her he's from a planet called Gallifrey. But he says the people who raised me, the Time Lords, were kind of posh. And so they would give people titles like the Doctor, the Bishop, the Rani. So that confirms the Rani is a title. He also names the Conquistador, the Pedant, and the Sagi-Shi. I don't know what a Sagi-Shi is. I'd have to look that up. And I don't know who would want to be called the Pedant. But he says, so they call you Doctor for 1,000 years, and that kind of becomes your name. So he dodges what his name is there. But then they come back to it at the end of the episode as he's getting out of the TARDIS. That's actually when he mentions the Pedant and the Sagi-Shi. And he says, and my name is, and then he steps out of the TARDIS. So he apparently tells Ruby and her family his true name, but we don't get to hear it.
Yeah, that is different.
Yeah. Also, it's different than what they had recently done on the show with Matt Smith's Doctor, who, when the issue came up with him, he implied in The Wedding of River Song that there was some terrible secret connected with his name and it must never be revealed. On the other hand, if the Time Lords are gone again, maybe it's okay to say the name again now. But it's a different take. It was interesting how they did that. They also had some other interesting stuff that we didn't mention. At one point, their first trip in time is to go back 150 million years. So that's the late Jurassic period. And they step out, and Ruby says, "Are there dinosaurs out there?" And he says, "I don't know." And so they step out, and there are brontosauruses. And for all you brontosaurus skeptics, yes, brontosauruses are a real dinosaur. There was some doubt about that for a while, but they're a real dinosaur. And they did live. They're scientifically accurate here. Brontosaurs did live in the late Jurassic period, and that was 150 million years ago. And they lived in the United States, which the doctor then points out. He says we're in what's going to be North America. In fact, he says we're at what will be a little town called Green River, and
Wyoming.
In Wyoming. Yeah. And Green River is a real town in Wyoming. It is, by most standards, a little town. There are only 12,000 people that live there today, but by Wyoming standards, it's a big city. It's the 7th most populous city in Wyoming.
And isn't the Dinosaur National Park in Wyoming too, in that area? I think it is.
That would certainly make sense. There are a lot of
to ask our resident Wyoming expert, Father Andrew Kinstetter, who's from Wyoming.
There are a bunch of big dinosaur finds in the big western states here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. In fact, in the 1900s, I probably will do a mysterious roll on this at some point, but there was a series of excavations between rabidly competing paleontologists called the Bone Wars in the late 19th century.
I was actually just reading about that this morning. So one other thing the doctor does.
Sorry. Before they get out of the TARDIS, though, Ruby says, "Is this safe? I mean, what if I step on a butterfly?" And the doctor is like, "Nobody ever steps on butterflies. How would that even work? You know, do you lure the butterfly down so you can step on it?" But despite his skepticism, a butterfly flies under Ruby's foot as she's putting it down. She steps on a butterfly. She turns into some kind of insect reptile lady with a slightly different name. And she says, let's see. She basically, she thinks he's said something about her that implies something bad. And she says, she's has a very militaristic attitude all of a sudden. And she says, "If you have made an incorrect accusation, I will have to kill you." and the doctor gets the broken butterfly and cups it in his hands and kind of breathes on it. And I assume, even though we didn't see it, he transferred some regeneration energy into it. And then it heals and it flies off, and she turns back into a human being. But it's a great comedic moment. The only thing I would have done different is I would have put a little glow in his hand so that fans would know how he's bringing the butterfly back to life.
And then he runs back to the TARDIS console and says, "I forgot to turn on the butterfly circuit," which explains how the doctor can travel through time without causing chaos like this everywhere. It's something in the TARDIS is preventing that sort of thing from happening.
Then they go to the year 21506, and when they get out on the space station, Ruby sees a transmat and says, "What, is that like a transporter on Star Trek?" And the doctor says, "We should visit them sometime."
Was there not a comic book crossover with the Fourth Doctor in Star Trek?
That has been done in the comics. It also almost was done with Stephen Moffat. If I recall correctly, who said, he used a word that starts with W, but he said, "I'm just a prostitute. I'm happy to do anything." And and Russell T Davies is a Star Trek fan, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could have a parallel universe crossover someday.
We had Lower Decks on Strange New Worlds. I would love to see the Doctor on Strange New Worlds. That would be that would be something. Now we would have an epic crossover episode of our podcast. So there's a lot of talk about, everyone's special and no one is wrong. When the Doctor and Ruby encounter the kids, I found it, there's a lot. You talk often about how Doctor Who is science fairy tale, not really science fiction per se.
Not even science fantasy.
No. And it's really these first 2 episodes, especially, have leaned into it. We're firmly in fairy tale land. Like none of it really makes sense from a logical point of view. The 6-year-old babies running a station and talking, and it doesn't make sense from, if you want hard science fiction, don't watch Doctor Who, because you're not going to get it here.
In fact, this is a conscious shift on Russell T Davies' part. I saw an interview with him where he was talking about it, and he referred back to the episode in the 10th Doctor's time where they go back and meet Queen Victoria. Mm-hmm. And it's at this at the beginning of this Torchwood Institute, and there's a castle filled with aliens that are humans that can transform into wolf-like creatures.
Right.
And Russell T Davies was saying, and that was kind of my way of handling werewolves at the point. They have to really be aliens. But he said, today I just make them werewolves. And so that moment in Wild Blue Yonder where the Doctor drew a line with the salt and dared what was from outside the universe to cross over it seems to have that seems to be our diegetic or in-story reason for why there are more fantasy elements coming into the show now.
Oh, I didn't connect those points, but that I'm glad at least he created a reason for the craziness, because it is much more of that case. I want to talk a little bit before we move on to the Devil's Court. I want to talk a little bit about the Boogeyman. Mm-hmm. When they first arrive, the Doctor and Ruby run from it in terror. Mm-hmm. And the Doctor's like, why am I running? I love new things. Although the Doctor has run from scary monsters very often in the past. But that it's not exactly strange, fangs and claws all out. But then, as you mentioned in your recap, the ship or the station created the Boogeyman as a story element for teaching the children or something along those lines. And it was making infrasound, which we've talked about is you could explain it better than I could.
Well, infrasound is very low frequency sound that humans can't hear. We can hear down to something, maybe depending on how good your hearing is, like 20, 30 hertz or cycles per second. The Doctor says this is 17 hertz, which is below what humans can hear. But infrasound can creep you out. It can induce feelings of anxiety and fear and panic in humans. And perhaps because there are some predators that make sound like that in our evolutionary history. And so that was scientifically accurate. I liked that. And they named, a frequency that this would be plausible for. It also, infrasound is sometimes responsible for reports of the paranormal. So paranormal investigators have to be aware of infrasound and be able to, in some cases, detect it. So there are sensors that you can use for that.
Yeah. And even though we can't hear it, we do
respond,
sense it somehow. Yeah. But in the end, the Doctor kind of reverts to type where when Nan E, I forget the woman's actual name,
Jocelyn.
Jocelyn was trying to eject the monster, the Boogeyman, from the airlock, the Doctor reverts to type where, save every creature is worthy of being saved. Like this creature should be saved, shouldn't be just cast into space to die, and risks his life to save it. So I thought that was interesting to see him kind of reverting to type in that case, even though it's a disgusting creature made of boogers.
I think I saw someone who had a criticism of this scene, which I think it has merit, that up to this point, the Boogeyman has been nothing but scary. Mm-hmm. He's done nothing but menace our heroes. And if they really want to sell why the Boogeyman should be saved, they did set it up early on with the Doctor talking about how I'm one of a kind, I'm unique, and that makes me special. And that's true of everybody. And then he has kind of a flashback to that to motivate him to save the Boogeyman when they're both being spaced. By the way, the science in this scene is terrible. The Boogeyman there's a vastly too much air blowing out of that space door. The air would have been evacuated in a couple of seconds, and it goes on for minutes, like a couple of minutes. So, and the Boogeyman is standing opposite the space door near the inner hatch. And if you're standing near the inner hatch, there is no air in front of you to push you out of the space door. The place that you'll get pushed out is if you're standing right up against the space door. But if you're with all that air in front of you trying to get out. But if you're standing up against the inner wall, then there's no air in front of you to push you out. So the science is bad here. But the doctor has a flashback and he decides to push the manual close button to close the space door so the boogeyman won't be blown out. But they haven't done anything to set up the boogeyman sympathetically. This is a pure intellectual decision on the doctor's part. They've done nothing to establish that it's not going to just continue being a violent homicidal monster once he shuts that space door. This would have been better if they had given us some indication, maybe to the doctor and Ruby, but not Jocelyn, that the boogeyman had some vulnerability or, something that would make it sympathetic.
Right. On the unrealism of the getting blown out because there wasn't enough air, I did notice they had these louvered doors open that look like vents. It's possible that Davies or someone on his staff decided more air is being blown in, and that's how we're going to explain it. And because someone heard our podcast and how often we talk about the unrealism of that, I'm just going to take that as gospel truth and just go with it.
Yeah. By the way, I like some of the I like some of the dialogue in this part of the show because so Jocelyn is like hidden in this room and she's using a filter, an AI filter to make her voice sound like an AI. Yeah. So she can be nanny to the kids. And it doesn't just rebroadcast her voice, it reprocesses it and changes her diction and stuff like that. And so there's one
and the words.
And the words. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one point where, she's talking over the intercom as nanny to the doctor and Ruby as they're going in search of the boogeyman. And she almost cusses. And, she's about to say a bad word. And the doctor says, "Language, nanny."
Yeah.
And I like that. That's a nice sign that we're not going to go down the Star Trek Discovery route where they're cussing every other episode.
Yeah.
It's nice they're keeping this family friendly. And I like the doctor giving her that little gentle scold. Well, then she proceeds to cuss anyway, but we only hear it through the nanny filter. So like at one point she says, "Oh, for the sake of God." And the nanny filter says, "Invoking the deity." And which is like, oh, I like that. The deity. So we've got monotheism here.
Yeah.
And then she at one point she's kind of cursing at the boogeyman, and she says something like, "Don't you touch them, you illegitimate person." Yeah. And so that was fun to have this modified cussing where as an adult,
right,
you know what she's saying, but it's not presented that way. I once watched a version of the movie Tremors, the Kevin Bacon movie with the graboids from underground. And
great movie.
It's a great movie, but I watched a version of it that was even greater because this was a 4TV version. Oh. And in the 4TV version, all of the characters are just going, "Gall darn, blah, 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 blah." And it's all this fake cussing. And it was so all the just relentless overload of fake cussing was so big that it just became hilarious.
Yeah.
Watching him do all this fake cussing. And then I saw the original version and it's like, oh, that cussing wasn't fake.
Yeah. When you see the lips don't match the mouth.
Also when the doctor figures out what the boogeyman is made of, there's a nice wordplay where the doctor turns to Ruby and says, "It's snot," and she's covered in it, and she says, "Yes. It's not."
Yes. Yeah, that is a dad joke of high proportions. And speaking of dad jokes, you mentioned the fart propelled space station, and it's like, how many nappies or diapers could that possibly be? And I'm like, as a dad, of 5 children. When multiple children were in diapers at a time, we had what was called a diaper genie. And it's like this little canister, and you put a diaper in and you twist it, and it creates like a little sausage inside. Basically, it's the worst sausage ever made. And it's supposed to contain the smell. It didn't. That thing was foul. When our last child was out of diapers, throwing that away was one of the best days ever. So my wife and I were watching the episode, and we were both like, yeah, we believe that part. That part is totally true.
By the way, on the it's snot versus it's not, there is for years, there has been a persistent autocorrect error where if I'm typing does not, it will sometimes autocorrect to dose not, like the snot of a female deer. Yeah, autocorrect, smarten up. I get some of those. It's crazy. All right. I think that's everything we have to say about Space Babies. We really need to talk about the Devil's Chord. Oh, just one other note about Space Babies.
Okay.
The doctor says Space Babies too many times.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just I with that one. I kind of wondered whether they were leaning into this idea from Classic Who, where everything was like not just a laser, but it was a space laser, and not just a sickness, but a space sickness treated by a space doctor. And so I wondered if it was a bit of a nod to the classic tendency to refer to everything as space whatever.
Yeah, but they do sometimes have the doctor be over enthusiastic about stuff for comedic effect. And so he's enthusiastically using the phrase Space Babies, but it goes too far.
Yeah.
In this case.
All right. Can we get a recap now?
When I used Space Door earlier, it was not superfluous. This was a door to space.
That's right.
To distinguish it from the internal door that is not a space door because it doesn't open to space.
That's right. The station door. All right. A recap of Devil's Chord.
In this episode, we open on a music teacher named Timothy Drake in 1925, who apparently is not Robin. As he's tutoring a young boy, he shows him the tritone known as the Devil's Chord, which summons Maestro, the villainous personified essence of music. Maestro tells him he's a musical genius who never got attention, and she offers to release all the songs in his heart. He agrees, she does so, and he dies. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Ruby decide to visit 1963 to watch the Beatles record their first album. But when they get there, the Beatles and everyone else in the world are playing only really boring, lame songs. People, including the Beatles, have lost interest in music. Since Ruby's a musician, the Doctor has her play a piano, which also summons Maestro, who menaces them. The Doctor realizes that Maestro is a member of the same pantheon as the toy maker, and he's genuinely terrified. The Doctor takes Ruby back to 2024 to show her the consequences of a world without music, and it's a wasteland experiencing a nuclear winter from a war that was caused by the lack of ability to express emotion through music. Maestro appears again and says the toy maker was his father. He also says that he gets stronger with every song that is left unsung, so he stole human music from the world, and as he gets stronger, he plans to steal music from the entire universe, resulting in the death of all life, leaving only a symphony of the Aeolian tones that are caused by the wind. The Doctor and Ruby escape back to 1963, and the Doctor realizes that there is a way to banish Maestro if he can find the right chord to send him back. Maestro continues menacing them, and using the famous Abbey Road piano, they have a musical duel with Maestro. As the Doctor tries to find the chord to banish him, and the Doctor almost finds it, and as he does so, musical notes appear and hang in the air. But he hits a bum note, and Maestro gets the upper hand. Fortunately, John Lennon and Paul McCartney see the notes hanging in the air above the piano, and they play the chord to banish Maestro. His last statement, as he's being banished, is, "The one who waits is almost here." And we finish with the Doctor, Ruby, and everyone else singing a UK Bollywood-style musical number called There's Always a Twist at the end. The end.
Maybe that's why Father Corey's not here. He hates musicals and
Really?
TV shows.
Oh.
Remember the Strange New Worlds episode, musical episode? Yeah, just kidding. So, all right, your overall impression of this one?
Well, I thought it was good. It had flaws. One of the biggest flaws is the Beatles are not central enough to the plot. They do two of them save the day, but we really needed. But only those two even have lines. You know, George Harrison and Ringo Starr don't even get any lines. The actors don't really look like them either.
No.
So they needed, and I don't know why they picked these actors. If they're not going to sing like them and they're not going to look like them, why didn't they get people who did one or the other, that either sounded like them or looked like them? Also, especially after the fake out at the beginning, where because Maestro has ripped all the good music out of the world, they're just singing this lame song about "That's My Dog." We needed to have a Beatles number at the end. They should have paid the money to get the rights to do a cover of a Beatles number in the episode. That would have been, you know, the logical climax of this episode, to finally get to hear the Beatles sing something we all know is one of their classic tunes. Maybe Hard Day's Night or something like that, which could reflect back on the hard day they've just had, possibly some of it at night. So that was a flaw. But there were things I liked. Like I mentioned the scene where the doctor's telling Ruby, "Oh yeah, I'm right over there in Shoreditch or wherever, and my granddaughter Susan is there."
The TARDIS Wiki does mention that they didn't use any Beatles songs because it is so very expensive to use a Beatles song. But yeah, because the Beatles don't own, Paul McCartney doesn't own the music anymore. It was all famously sold off.
Yeah. And bought by Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. Yeah, I don't know who's got it now, but so for me, the my overall impression was enjoyable. I liked it. There was some very clever musical puns and dialogue, and we'll get into some of those. I thought it was interesting that Murray Gold apparently shows up as himself in this one. I think he was conducting the orchestra. He was
playing a piano in the Bollywood number at the end.
Oh, okay. Murray Gold is the guy who does the music for Doctor Who. So that we hear the Doctor Who theme in the episode. Played on the piano by the maestro,
which then takes us into the opening credits, and then taking us out of the opening credits, Ruby is playing the Doctor Who theme on the jukebox in the TARDIS.
Yep.
And so we have this from the piano to the opening credits to the jukebox. It's the same song. Yeah. Which is really cool. They also, so that tells you right there, we're going to be playing with diegetic and non-diegetic elements to the show, which pays off later, because they're in the Doctor and Ruby have escaped from Maestro and gone back to the EMI studio, and there's this ominous music in the background, and Ruby, which Ruby immediately realizes indicates Maestro is here or about to be here, and she says, "Doctor, don't you hear that?" And the Doctor says, "I thought that was non-diegetic."
That was awesome. I love that. I immediately thought of you, Jimmy, because I've never heard the diegetic, non-diegetic before our conversations. So just to hear them bring it up in the episode, I'm like, that is just so awesome. Yeah. That was really good. It's almost like, I mean, they're really playing in the fact that the Doctor kind of knows he's a character. You know, there's this idea that's in there. Like he's very self-aware.
He breaks the fourth wall when he says there's always a twist at the end. He's looking at the camera and he winks.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's and this is not new to Doctor Who. This goes all the way back to the first Doctor, the Feast of Stephen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where he
the
winks.
Feast of Stephen, where he talks to the audience and wishes everyone at home a happy Christmas.
Yes. So this, I mean, that's a little different, but it's similar.
And we had Mrs. Flood at the end of the Church at Ruby Road look at the camera and said, "What, you never seen a TARDIS before?" And she winks. Yeah.
So we're doing that now. We're doing that now. So we have this musical lesson with Timothy Drake, which, but I don't know if you know Tim Drake, but I have a friend named Tim Drake who runs a
The Tim Drake I
retreat
know
center?
is okay. The Tim Drake I know is the third Robin of Batman and Robin. So first it was Dick Grayson, then it was Jason Todd, then it was Tim Drake. Now it's Damian Wayne.
Okay. Now you have a friend whose name's Tim Drake. He runs a retreat center up in Wisconsin, I think, Pachuman Terrace. So, and he's written some books and things. So I didn't know if you knew him, but so I thought that was funny. He's given this piano lesson to the boy who it turns out is named Henry Arbinger.
Henry Arbinger,
which who's a harbinger, which is for folks, it's sort of like an omen. And he's telling about this devil's chord, which he says was banned by the church in the medieval times because it lets the devil enter the room. No. Is there any?
So there is a tritone that is sometimes called the devil's chord or the devil in music, and it's dissonant. So, excuse me, my sister's dog is here, and I'm having to. She's wanting attention right now. But not right now, Luna. So it's a dissonant chord, and so it was not commonly used. It was often avoided. There were some individual Benedictine, like there was a Benedictine monk named Guido of Arezzo, who around the year 1000, who refused to use it in his system of music. But that's gotten, someone at some point in history refused it, gets turned into the church banned it.
Right.
And no, that didn't happen. And that got turned into stories about singers being excommunicated or otherwise punished for using this chord. And no, none of that ever happened.
Okay. So this story, some of it reminds me a lot of a Big Finish story that Father Corey and I talked about recently, featuring the Eighth Doctor, called Scherzo, which was this frame narrative about a king who banishes music from his kingdom, but in doing so, unwittingly bans heartbeats and the sound of the waves and all musical sound and and the effects it has. And folks can go back and listen to that one and watch that one if they want. But I just thought it was interesting to have this again so soon after we talked about that, this idea of music being really sucked out of the world and the consequences for the world. A world without music and how it removes joy, hope. The world that the Ruby and the Doctor encounter is very gray. And in fact, we see this huge contrast. Yeah, initially, right.
Emotionally, not visually.
Although when they're on the rooftop looking out over London, the Doctor even remarks how gray and dark it is. And by the end, once the music is released, everything is much brighter, and you have like the cinematographer, has really, or the film editor, bumped up the saturation, and it's really much more colorful than it was before. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to really highlight the importance of music in humanity, and how without music we very quickly descended into self-destructive global war that destroyed everything. So I think music is, truly is an essential aspect of humanity. And I think J.R.R. Tolkien was onto something when his mythology told how God sung the creation into being and that sort of thing. So I really agree with, I really like that aspect of exploring that. And then to have some creature that sucks the music out of everything and is a very devil-like creature. And that's the devil of the title. The maestro is a devil-like creature. So I found that interesting and fascinating.
Speaking of maestro, I really so maestro is played by an actor named Jinx Monsoon, who I guess is a transvestite and very campy, and I guess won RuPaul's Drag Race. And and there were rumors, because maestro means master. There were rumors before this that Maestro was going to be the new incarnation of the Master. And I'm really glad they didn't go that way, because I don't think this portrayal and character is right for the Master. Maestro is a villain in a way the Master is not. Yeah. And it just wouldn't fit. I do appreciate that if they're going to have more LGBTQ plus whatever elements in the show, which is every show now, and unfortunately, it's not just in the series. It's like they're sticking at least a little something in every freaking episode.
Yeah.
But if they're going to do that, at least they're doing it somewhat even-handedly, because here I don't know exactly what Jinx Monsoon is, but because I haven't read up on him, but he's the villain. So it's not like only the good people get to be LGBTQ plus whatever, but the villains can be too. And so, that if you're going to include it, at least be even-handed about it, and they're doing that.
Speaking of the Master, I did read an interview with Russell T Davies on Radio Times, the British website, where he said he doesn't intend to bring in the Master at all anytime soon. Yeah, not this season at all. So, and the Maestro is not the Master. He was very clear on that. He did say he was being a little cheeky by naming the Maestro because he knew what people were going to do with that, but he was just being a little cheeky with that.
One thing that I've noticed on Doctor Who is, so we have these personifications of elemental concepts that have been showing up, like the 13th Doctor met time, and here we've got music, and I guess the toy maker was games, and they're all jerks. I mean, this is a time travel show. You meet time, you don't expect time to be a jerk. Music makes people happy. You don't expect music to be a jerk. It's like, what's with all these evil personifications?
That is a good question. Yeah. What is he trying to do?
Oh, well, games are fun, but their personification is, evil too. And the Doctor refers to as the Pantheon. And there was a Pantheon previously was it the third Doctor's time, the Pantheon, or something else? Sarah Jane Smith encountered a Pantheon of Discord. I'm not sure what that would refer to. I think it was in the spinoff media. There are pantheons. Yeah,
I think it was in the Sarah Jane Chronicles. In fact,
I've never watched all of that.
Okay, so it'll be curious to see where they're going with that. Some other elements. So they run into not just the Beatles doing a recording, but someone else named Cilla Black.
Cilla Black, yeah, she was a real musician back in the '60s that the Beatles advocated for. Yeah,
in fact, she sang with them occasionally, I guess.
I like the way they got in, because they show up at the EMI studios and the Doctor and Ruby barge in, and they realize we need an explanation for why we're here. And I thought, here we're going to get the psychic paper, and we can introduce that to the audience. And instead of doing that, Ruby just grabs a cart from a tea lady and says, "It's okay. You can take 5. I was told to do this." And so the tea lady goes and takes a break. Ruby and the Doctor take the cart and start delivering tea to people.
It's Ruby. Yeah. Ruby is the one who figures that out, which is kind of fun, that it's not just always the Doctor, showing off. And in fact, it's another aspect of this Doctor is he's not always the one. He has more of those elements of the classic Doctors, where he's not the Time Lord victorious, Time Lord supreme. The companions actually have some good ideas and actually solve some things occasionally. So I did like that. I have a note about the Beatles' weird dog song, which is funny. So you mentioned Aeolian tones. What are Aeolian tones again?
It's they're sounds that are generated by the wind. So that's a real thing. And
very specifically the wind.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they didn't make that up.
Okay. And the Doctor calls it the highest form of thought or something like that. I presumably being a little over.
Maestro calls it that.
That's right. The Maestro does. Yeah, I forgot to write down who actually said that.
They have now. One thing that happens that's very dramatic is when Ruby plays the piano. So whenever Maestro appears, he comes out of a piano. He climbs out of the interior of it, and which is creepy. And Ruby points out it wouldn't even work if there was someone hiding in the piano. So this is a sign that Maestro is not just an ordinary person. But when Maestro is getting out of the piano that Ruby plays, we hear the giggle.
Yes.
From Stooky Bill. And that tells the doctor, that's what tells the doctor Maestro is part of the same pantheon as the toy maker. And he runs and he takes Ruby with him and he is terrified. And he's then able to do something that's really brilliant for a moment. Even though I am totally not a fan of the new sonic screwdriver, he uses it to do something sonic for once. And he basically turns on noise cancellation software, which causes Maestro and everything else in the environment to turn silent. So he basically created a zone of noise cancellation. And we see Maestro trying to fight it, like yelling and breaking a bottle and stuff like that to try to generate sound. Ultimately, Maestro does break it, takes a tuning fork and puts it in water, and it causes the water to vibrate in a way that, for some unexplained reason, cancels the noise cancellation. But the doctor this is a very effective moment because it goes on. It's not just 5 seconds. This show is dead silent for, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that. And as the doctor and Ruby are hiding from Maestro, and it's very effective. It's very creepy to just have absolutely no sound. And the doctor later says, when you're dealing with gods, of course, these are little g gods, but when you're dealing with gods, you get like one shot and that was it. So
like playing catch with the toy maker.
Yeah. You can't do it again.
Right. I really like that moment when Ruby's playing the piano on the rooftop and the people, like they're drawn to it. They like, even though everyone has previously, in the cafeteria were aghast at singing or music or whatever, the people are drawn to the music. And there's that one elderly woman who starts playing Clair de Lune on her piano, and Clair de Lune is one of the most beautiful pieces of music. I love Clair de Lune, and it just shows how awful the Maestro is, that he comes and kills her, to sucks the music out of her, and that effective like animation they do of the music, really like the musical notes coming alive and being real.
Yeah, they have like a musical staff come out of the instrument and grab people and squeeze them and stuff.
Right. There was a moment in the rap battle, but it's not really rap, but the musical battle where, or even just before, where the Maestro, he played the Doctor Who theme at the beginning, but he plays the Harold Saxon theme a little bit in the middle there, which is kind of interesting, the kind of reminding the Doctor.
Also, and Ruby, when she's playing the piano, that's Ruby's theme, non-diegetically, that's now diegetic in the show.
Right.
She's playing her own theme, her own motif.
Right. The Murray Gold theme, like the Clara theme. She had a theme.
And then when after they get back to EMI, Maestro has captured Ruby and is holding her up off the ground with music staffs and is squeezing her, and she says, and she wants Ruby to sing because she's the only human being that remembers music, and she wants to capture all the music that Ruby has in her. But then Ruby, well, okay, so Maestro, he then says, wait, there's a song hidden in her heart. And she starts to tease out that song, and it's Carol of the Bells, or Ring Christmas Bells, which is the song that was connected with that they played when Ruby was found. And so this is more about the mystery of who Ruby Sunday is. I like that Christmas music defeats the Maestro in that moment, by the way. Yeah, indeed. Yes. And she says and it starts snowing in the room. So there's our warning again. And Maestro says, how could a song have so much power, and power like him? And the Doctor says, who? And Maestro says, the oldest one. On the night of her birth, he couldn't have been there. What for? Who was there? And then says, this is very wrong. So Maestro obviously knows something about someone, the oldest one, who could be connected with Ruby. Now, here's a thought. The last thing Maestro says is the one who waits is coming, is almost here, in fact. The one who waits was introduced in the church on, or not the church on Ruby Road, but the Giggle, where the toy maker was talking to the 14th Doctor and was recounting his victories, like he turned the master into his gold tooth and stuff. But he says, then I saw the one who waits and ran. And the Doctor says, who is the one who waits? And the toy maker says, part of someone else's story. So the one who waits has been set up as someone even the toy maker was afraid of. And it's plausible that if you wait a long time, you might be the oldest one. And so Maestro might have twigged to the one who waits is almost here by hearing Ruby's song, Carol of the Bells. And realized somehow the oldest one, the one who waits, is connected with that song. And
hence connected with Ruby's and her origins. Yeah.
And that means he's almost here.
And is the Maestro the child of the toy maker?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are other children of the toy maker out there.
Presumably.
Presumably. Okay.
Presumably the other members of the Pantheon.
Okay. I have to say, when they said musical battle, I'm waiting for The Devil Went Down to Georgia.
I know. I've got it in my notes. They needed to either do Duel and Banjos, or they needed to do The Devil Went Down to Georgia, or both. Instead, they're playing this random stuff. I mean, it's not entirely random. I mean, like the Doctor does Maple Leaf Rag, which is nice.
Yeah.
But they really needed to focus that battle on either Duel and Banjos or The Devil Went Down to Georgia, or both.
Yep. That was a lost opportunity. That in the Beatles music. And in my notes, it says, of course, the Beatles saved the world because, the Beatles.
Yeah. It's not the first time that Doctor Who, at least in the spinoff media, has. Well, okay, it's not the first time that the Beatles actually were on Doctor Who back in the first Doctor's time. There was a TV broadcast, and they wanted to have them appear as old men in a documentary looking back on their lives as the Beatles, but I guess it was Brian Epstein didn't want to do that, so they just played a clip of them performing a song from another TV show.
Oh, right.
Like from Top of the Pops or something. And it's unfortunately been edited out. It's when they were using the time viewer.
Yeah.
With Vicky and Ian and Barbara. Unfortunately, it's been edited out because of rights issues. In the spinoff media, they do something really clever though. There's, for one of the anniversaries of the show, the 40th or something, they did a series of commemorations at Big Finish. And for the 5th Doctor, they did one where he and Nyssa and Tegan go back to 1963 to meet the common men. And if you remember back in An Unearthly Child, Susan Foreman is listening to a transistor radio, and she's listening to a song by John Smith and the Quarry and the Common Men, which are kind of like the Beatles. And they even play that up in the 5th Doctor story, where they go back to meet the Common Men. I keep saying the Quarrymen, which was an early name for the Beatles. But they go back to meet the Common Men, and they really play them like they're the Beatles. I mean, they're doing the Liverpudlian accents and stuff like that. They sound like the Beatles. And it turns out there are aliens involved, because of course there are. It's always aliens. And these particular aliens are feeding off the emotional energy of the fans, and they're using it to, for their own purposes. And the 5th Doctor has the most awesome line, as he says, because they're feeding off the adulation of their fans. And the 5th Doctor has the most awesome line, as he said in a horrified tone, "All you needed was love."
That one reminds me of the other Big Finish one we recently did, the 7th Doctor one, The Rapture, where these aliens were feeding off of people's emotions during music. Yeah, it's funny. Music has been showing up a lot. Interesting. Any other notes on this one, Jimmy? We talked about the musical number already, at the end, and
yeah, I don't really think so. Nope.
Okay. So just, as the sort of as a wrap up of how maybe how we feel about the beginning of this season, my last note is just that overall I liked the 15th Doctor, all the things I liked about him in the 60th anniversary special and the Church on Ruby Road are still there. It's just manic and ramped up a little bit more than it was before, and that's really good. They're leaning into the fairy tale, as I mentioned before. They're almost trying too hard, though, and I wonder if they're going to tone it down a bit as we go. I don't know, but we'll see.
I don't mind the fairy tale elements they're doing. That's fine with me. Oh, one thing I did think about this is, wait a minute. So the musical world went off the rails in 1925, and so history got rewritten where until 1963, music was dying. Mm-hmm. And then they re-inject music in 1963, but they never go back to 1925 to fix the origin of the problem. So it would appear in the new version of the timeline that music was basically dying between 1925 and 1963. So they didn't really address this issue, which I think they should have for a time travel show. Yeah,
they really should have resolved that with a line of dialogue.
They could have, they could try to explain that in terms of the fairy tale, or they could have made that decision because of the fairy tale aspects, but I would say that's a misuse of fairy tale. Mm-hmm. But I don't mind it generally.
Oh, I did want to mention at the very end, when they're going back to the TARDIS from the Abbey Road Studios, which was not yet Abbey Road Studios, they're singing in the rain, and then on the crosswalk where it was lighting up as they were running across it and playing tones, which seemed like homages to two different musical things. The scene from Big where Tom Hanks and
someone else,
the other actor, were dancing on the piano thing, playing chopsticks or whatever it was, and then also a little bit of homage to Singing in the Rain with Gene Kelly. Although, according to the TARDIS Wiki, the singing in the rain was entirely accidental. They had set up for the scene, and then it started raining, literally raining. That was not production rain; that was real rain. Yep. And so they just gave them umbrellas and let them go with it.
I've heard tell it does that in the UK.
Once in a while, occasionally. All right, so that will do it, I guess, for both the Devil's Chord and Space Babies. And now we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Leslie H., Bruce E., Daniel P., Loretta F., and Richard G. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So we would love to hear what you thought of Space Babies or Devil's Chord or anything we had to say about them. You can do so by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch us on our YouTube channel, where you can see us in video in Secrets of Doctor Who at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. And be sure, while you're there, to like and subscribe and leave a comment and do all those things. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next episode in the 15th Doctor's first season, called Boom. Until then,
Stephen Moffat. So looking forward to that.
Yes, and potentially features the church, the Church of the Soldiers with the army. We have colonels and bishops and stuff.
Not wild about them.
Yeah. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, there's no such thing as monsters, just creatures you haven't met yet.